thank you for inviting me to do another Insta Live with you. And this one is about, you know, we talked about talking about the impact that pregnancy loss can have on parenting, and that's not something that we think a lot about in the Miscarriage Association, to be honest. So you've really made me think. But we actually reached out to our followers and our community and asked them for their thoughts. And so I guess we should start by just thanking them for sharing some of their thoughts and feelings and concerns on this topic, which we've shared with you. So I'm going to let you kick things off.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about thanking people for getting in touch, because it's not an easy thing to talk about. And yeah, there were some really useful things shared. And I think one of the first things that stands out is that it's rare that one person gets in touch and nobody else gets in touch about the same thing. So that there's clearly some shared experiences there. So fair to say, Ruth, that some of the things that stood out to me were the impact of anxiety after having pregnancy loss. So greater anxiety with my children, so worrying that something's going to happen, things like that, or with a further pregnancy, anxiety about that as well. There was also, people mentioned kind of guilt, so about I am affected by the loss, and that's affecting how I'm able to be with my children, and feeling bad about that, feeling guilty about that. There was some other stuff in there about talking about dads and partners, so actually what it's like for them, you know, the person sort of standing alongside me that's going through this too, but maybe in a different way, and how it affects them. And there was also some stuff in there about being a step parent, or somebody that's not otherwise biologically straight away sort of related like that, if you like, but very much a part of the family and an important part of the family. So start with some of those and then go from there.
Yeah. So maybe we start with the issue of anxiety, and it, you know, as very often happens when we talk about these things, you know, you get to start from the point that so many of these feelings are completely understandable. They're not pathological. They are a result of going through a really, really difficult experience. And I think the thing about anxiety is that once you've been through a pregnancy loss, and of course it's not the same for everyone, but for a lot of people, it's been a situation where, you know, they were expecting something good and positive and happy to happen, and then it was suddenly turned on its head. So once you've been in the experience of things completely going beyond your control and completely unexpected, you can't help but think that's going to happen again. So you're almost anticipating things going wrong, partly to protect yourself, I guess. But it can also be really, really tricky to manage, because you're anxious about what has happened and about what might happen in the future in terms of future pregnancy, but that can also impact and sort of spread out to how you feel about your children or about your daily life. And I think when it comes to your children, it's understandable that you then worry, well, if things could happen to this unborn baby, maybe it also means that things can happen to my children, and it increases your anxiety about them.
Yeah,
that's probably one of the major issues.
No, yeah, I'd absolutely say, and there's that. I think there's two elements to it that I'd hope to give some useful perspectives on there. I think you raised that thing about that it's not pathological, it's completely reasonable to be anxious about it, and that's a really important part of it, because even if you do successfully manage to say to yourself, okay, I understand that this is reasonable that I'm anxious about this, sometimes the people around you don't feel the same. So your family, as well-meaning as they might be, might tell you, you know, you're overreacting, that was then, this is now, you know, all of those kind of things. And that can make you doubt yourself, actually. Like, what's wrong with me? Why am I so anxious? This isn't the same place that I'm in. But that's sort of fundamentally the shorthand of saying that is the people that tell you that are wrong. The people that tell you that are wrong. It is a completely normal reaction, and it's not only not a sign of a malfunctioning brain, it is a sign of a functioning brain. A functioning brain learns from its experiences, and particularly about things that are really scary or devastating. And what could be scarier or more devastating than pregnancy loss or losing a child? What could be more scary or devastating than that? Why wouldn't your brain hang on to that and go, we don't want that to happen again? And that's all that's happening. The other ways of understanding why it's completely normal to feel anxious about this is, when we're trying to understand why somebody feels anxious about something, some of the factors are how likely it feels that it's going to happen. So again, it might be easy for somebody to not worry about something happening to their child if they've never had any experiences that have shown them that it could happen, whereas you know better. The second is how awful it might be if it did happen. And again, it's very common for somebody to experience a real dial-up in their anxiety, even if nothing's gone wrong during the pregnancy. And one of the ways we understand that is, before I only had to worry about me. But now the idea of losing this thing that it's sort of devastating. It's just the idea of it is so overwhelmingly scary, because partly maybe I don't even know how I'm going to be able to cope. And if you have had that experience before, again, you know how painful that is. So of course you're worried about it happening again. But there is an element which I think is maybe missed a little bit, which is another thing that can really dial up your anxiety, is your sense of responsibility. And I think this comes up a lot for people when it's about pregnancy loss, is like, objectively, there's nothing you can do. But how you might feel is you might find yourself questioning, you know, should I have done something different? I went for that big walk. Was it that? Was it what I chose to eat or not eat? Was it something about the preparation that I took? Whatever, like all sorts of different things of maybe I did something. And that's scary too. And that adds to your anxiety going forward, because then that feels like, well, I should be really alert for everything I'm doing now to make sure that nothing goes wrong. And it's a generalization to say this, but I don't think it's an unfair one. And this isn't to diminish how males might feel, you know, as sort of dads, but I think it's a fair thing to say that women, more responsibility is put upon women generally, but certainly around raising a child. So that, for me, is one way we can understand why you might feel particularly anxious about whether or not things are going to go well, because you might feel if something goes wrong, that'll be my fault. It's completely unfair, but it might.
Yes, it's a sense of responsibility. And people talk about that also just after they've miscarried, or when they've had a diagnosis of miscarriage or ectopic pregnancy. You know, my job was to grow this baby, was to take care of it, and I've obviously done a rubbish job, otherwise this wouldn't have happened, you know, which is a whole other, probably a whole other conversation. But there is something about that feeling of responsibility and a need to protect, so that, going back to the child or the children that you have now, which might be a new baby following this loss, there's a sense of, I absolutely must protect, and maybe other people will see it as overprotective, and maybe you will too, but it's your way of trying to have some element of control over the things that, you know, we don't always have control over.
Absolutely. Yeah, even the term miscarriage sort of suggests that it's been done wrong. And again, it's completely not fair. Completely not fair. And there's also a second question then about, okay, well, what do I do about it? So if I'm able to recognise, I think job number one is recognising that it is reasonable to be anxious and more anxious because of your experiences. That's why you're anxious, not because something's gone wrong with your brain, but because of what you've been through. And so therefore, actually, what do we do about it is slightly different, because we're not talking about something that's wonky. Like, it's not like I'm anxious about something, I've got no reason to be anxious about it. I'm anxious about something because I've got good reason to be anxious about it. And what do you do about that? Actually, acknowledging that the way that you feel is step number one. Acknowledging that it's reasonable is step number one, because it stops you, hopefully, berating yourself for feeling anxious, which we call like a second loop. So I'm already anxious, and then I'm annoyed at myself for feeling anxious. So if you're able to kind of work on your ability to accept that maybe it's reasonable for me to feel this way, A second thing is, how do I express what I sort of need? So actually, you might feel, if you are anxious about your child, the kind of things you'll notice yourself doing is trying to control whether things will happen. So that will be checking. So you might find yourself going and checking on your child quite a lot. So that might be feeling their chest to see if they're breathing. It might be something more like what other people might feel is excessive cleaning. So I might sterilize more than once, or I might feel like I need to do things over and over again. Or when somebody's holding my baby, I might be watching them or hovering over them, and then people kind of get annoyed at me that I'm telling them what to do, or they get defensive about the way that I'm approaching it. So there's something about how do I communicate and being solid with the idea that I know you're not afraid of it like I am, but I am afraid of it, and I'd really appreciate it if you respect that.
Right.
Is
Really
yeah.
helpful.
That's such a hard conversation to have. You end up arguing about what's right or wrong. So you say you need to sterilize it twice, and the other person says no, you don't. You only need to sterilize it once, and we end up just clashing. Whereas if you just say, I know you don't think that, but I do, and I need it in order to feel safe. Is that something you can do for me? It becomes a different conversation.
Yeah.
Long term, or how we eventually help somebody break out of that cycle of anxiety, the main thing is it will usually get better with time. One thing that changes is your baby or your child starts to seem a little bit more robust as they grow. They feel like they're made out of spiders' webs when they first come out. They feel like they're so fragile, and it will seem more robust. But it could be a while. That could take quite a long time, and that's all right for it to take a long time too. It's stressful, but if it's really getting in your way and you want to work on it, the main piece of advice is communicating what you need, and then trying to gradually allow other people or yourself to let go of some of the check-in, and allowing other people to do things the way that they want to do them within reason. So, for example, if you're really anxious about it, you might feel you can't leave your baby at all, and that then becomes really stressful for everybody and you as well. So gradually, with really trusted people, go for a walk for 5 minutes and seeing if you kind of feel okay leaving them there, and you can stretch that out to 10 minutes. You don't have to go away for a day. It's okay to take it gently on yourself. That's usually what we'll help people do, is gradually relinquish some of that control at a pace that they feel comfortable with. That's usually what we'll try and do when somebody's caught in that cycle of anxiety.
I imagine that as the children get older and are more verbal, you might even have conversations with them and say, do you know what, this makes me worry a bit, or I find it difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my mum still worries about me.
Well, I was hesitating to say this, but I still worry about my 30-somethings, and they know it. They know it's what I'm like. They accept it. They tease me, and so I worry quietly.
Yeah, it's useful if you can talk about it again in that capacity. If they're older and there's things that, I don't know, they're fighting back because they feel hemmed in by you wanting to know where they are all the time or whatever, being able to name it as yours and own it as yours is really helpful. So for you to be able to say, look, I get afraid. I know you don't think I need to be afraid, and I respect that, but I will find it hard when you go to the park on your own or something like that. And it means a lot to me for you to just text. That's what I'm requesting of you, and I'll leave you alone. If you can do that bit for me, if you can own it as yours, that can be helpful.
Yeah, and that's treating them in a sort of adult way. They might not be adults yet, but it shows respect.
Yeah,
and I think that's mutual, and then that's helpful. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing, because that is helpful for people to know. It doesn't go away completely. Should we talk a bit about the guilt stuff?
Yeah. I mean, it comes up a lot. I mean, it came up a lot, and I'm just looking at the comments that people had sent. But and somebody talks about feeling guilty that if I'm grieving for the baby I've lost, it means I'm not feeling, I'm not feeling grateful for the child or the children that I have already, and that that is quite tricky, because actually guilt can permeate all over the place with all sorts of different elements in parenting after loss. And the thing is that people often say, well, you know, you should be, at least you've got a child already, you should be grateful for the child you've got. And it's not that you're not. It just doesn't take away your feelings of sadness and grief. And that's why it's difficult, because if you're grieving, you're also maybe more fragile, more easily upset or irritated, or finding it harder to concentrate, finding it harder to enjoy being with your child. And so you feel bad because you're not being with them in the same way that you were before. And that can be really difficult, I think, for people.
Yeah, awful. And it's, again, so unfair, because you can no more stop yourself grieving than you can stop yourself sneezing. You know, it's going to happen and it's normal. And then to feel guilty about something that is natural is unfair. And it's also completely understandable. Like it's kind of the parenting trap in a way, like feeling guilty regardless. So should I have done this? Should I have done that? One thing that can be helpful to think about, or a different mindset to take about the grief is, and whether or not I should feel guilty about it, is it's a natural response. So the way that I would kind of describe grief is it's very anxiety-like. It's very similar sort of feeling, but based on shoulds. So I should have done that, or should I have done something differently, or should I now do something more? That kind of thing. And it comes to a degree from a good place, in that I want to do a good job as a parent. So with my child that is in front of me, I want to be present, I want to be around for them, and I want to be my best self, if you like, around them. But there is something that is stopping me from doing that. And the analogy I would use is a physical health issue. So if you, for example, this happens quite frequently with things that are hidden, like arthritis, or even, you know, if you had like extreme IBS or something like that, that was affecting how you felt on a day-to-day basis. And again, that takes away your energy, it takes away your patience, you're more irritable when you're tired and when you're in pain. But there's nothing you can do about it. You haven't chosen to feel that way. It just is, actually. And it will have an effect on how you are with your child. So I suppose there's partly, it's again being forgiving of yourself, that actually it's not that I've chosen to feel this way and it is reasonable for me to feel this way. Yes, it will affect the way that I am with my child, but there is also an opportunity there, which is part of what we are as parents, is models for our children on how to deal with emotion. And the expectation that you should not feel stuff when something big is going on actually isn't a helpful expectation to set. So actually, and again, if it's a small child, it might feel, there's levels of how comfortable you might feel sort of being really open with them, but even just as simple as owning your stuff again. So again, if you've been irritable with them, being able to say, I'm sorry, you know, Daddy's just having a hard day today. You know, I shouldn't be taking that out on you. Or sometimes I get sad and that's not about you, it's about missing someone. And your children will be able to understand that even from quite a small stage. The idea of missing someone is a sort of simple element that they'll be able to get their head around, even if not like fully grief. So being able to show them that it's okay to feel, that it's okay to talk about that, and that you don't necessarily need to do anything, it just is, and it's all right to seek emotional support. They might even learn that how you deal with somebody that's sad is you might just need to give them a cuddle sometimes. And if you can model that, hopefully as they grow and they move into adulthood, that's something they will take with them, that it's all right, that's okay to feel that way. You don't have to be chipper all the time. That's quite a big thing. It's a powerful thing for them to be able to have.
I totally agree. And people have said to us in the past, you know, I was crying and then I felt really guilty because my other child came into the room, and they just sat on my knee and wiped my tears away and made me feel, you know, and patted my face as if they were the parent and I was the child. And there is something very beautiful about that. And you're right, it is also the modeling. It's saying, I'm feeling really sad. And if you know, again, it depends on the age and the understanding of the child. But if the child knows that this is about a pregnancy that was lost, if they know that you're feeling sad about the baby, and you can talk about it a little bit, not a whole lot, but a little bit. If you just say, I'm feeling really sorry, you know, I'm feeling really sad that we won't have the brother or sister that we hoped you would have.
Yeah.
Which both expresses it in a simple way, and also, I think, potentially prevents that child from feeling that you'd rather have the baby that isn't than the one that is. Because that can be difficult. If a child feels that you're weeping for somebody they didn't even know, does that mean you don't really love them?
There's a useful principle which is anxiety thrives in the dark, is the way that I would put it, which is sometimes what people can prevent people from showing how they feel to their children is, I don't want to upset them, or I don't want them to feel responsible for my feelings and come and, you know, help me, etc. But they can usually tell. They can tell that something's going on, and it's harder when they don't know what it is, because sometimes they'll feel like it's them, or sometimes they will make assumptions about maybe it's something I've done or whatever it might be. Whereas if you're able to just own it and just say, yeah, I am feeling sad. I am feeling sad. It isn't anything you've done. And the idea that your child knows that it's okay, that you go up to somebody and you pat them and you maybe wipe their tears away, they're only able to do that because you've shown them. You've shown them because you've done that for them. And that is it's a mark of your parenting rather than something that you've scarred them with. It's a skill you've given them, which is a lovely thing, even though it might not feel it at the time.
Yeah, Ted, I think there's another kind of guilt too sometimes in parenting after loss, which is if you're not feeling quite as thrilled and happy and zippy and isn't this marvelous after you've had a child after a loss, because everyone's expectations, including your own, are, thank heaven, this time it's worked out and I've got a baby and I should be happy. And you might not be happy just as, you know, in many normal circumstances, the sort of cornflake package kind of happy parent and joyful children who are always smiling and laughing and looking adorable. That, you know, that isn't the norm for everybody all the time. But also because perhaps you've had a particularly difficult anxiety-ridden pregnancy, and that's still something that's part of who you are, and maybe you're still feeling a bit down and maybe depressed following the birth. But it's also sometimes complicated because sort of by rights you shouldn't have this baby, because actually if your pregnancy had continued you wouldn't be having this baby now, and that's a really complicated thing to kind of think through. You hold those things at the same time. The sadness for the baby that didn't make it, and the love and the feelings for the baby that did. I think that conflict can be difficult and make you feel guilty.
Yeah, I think those are all really useful points. It's complicated, and it makes sense. Is the main thing. When you understand what's happening in somebody's mind, it does make sense. But sometimes what other people will give you the impression of is it doesn't make sense, because all they've got is the outside. They just see that you're sad now that your baby's here, and they can't join the dots, if you like. So yeah, hopefully hearing some of that explanation, Ruth, will be helpful for someone actually.
Yeah.
Do we do the stuff about the sort of dads and partners?
Yeah, let's. I mean, dads and partners, gosh, I don't know what it is about us, but we do have this whole thing about let's just call everybody a partner, and then we don't have to be genderizing everybody. I mean, there is this really strong British kind of tradition that the partner is the one who is strong, silent, and supportive. So even if they're feeling the loss of a baby through, or the loss of a child through you know, in pregnancy, they are supposed to be just not showing that, just kind of keeping that inward. I mean, they may not feel the loss in the same way. They may feel differently about the new baby that's come along. They may be overjoyed. They may be hoping desperately that this is going to heal the pain. Or they may also still be feeling sad for the baby that was lost, and maybe, glad about this one, but also dealing with the same difficult feelings that we've just been talking about, anxiety and grief and guilt. So I don't know that there are I don't have any sort of special thoughts, other than in many ways the partners are in a similar position as the person who's had the loss and who's physically had the baby.
Yeah.
Unless they feel an extra responsibility for keeping everybody happy and cheery all the way through, whatever the original partner is feeling.
I think it can be one thing that can stop people from speaking up about the fact that they are struggling. One thing we all put on ourselves is the idea that, well, other people have got it worse, if you like. And in this scenario, what often happens is the partner feels, well, my partner has lost the baby. I've lost the baby too, but they've got it worse because they've got the physical repercussions. They've got all of that kind of, so therefore I'm not allowed to feel bad. I'm not allowed to put it across. There's also something that if your partner who's had the baby, if the mum is really struggling, is really anxious, for example, often they'll feel like they have to hide that from everybody else, but at home they don't have to hide it as much. And so sometimes the partner bears the brunt of it and has to do their best to try and support. Some of it they understand, some of it they don't understand, but sometimes they can feel very alone with that as well, while they've got all their stuff going on about it too. And there is one extra dimension, which is the traumatic nature of the actual way that the pregnancy was lost. For some partners, they were there. For some partners, they weren't there, but they knew it was happening. For some partners, some people have described for me, for example, their partner being wheeled away from them and the doctor saying to them, essentially, we don't know if they're coming back. And they were just left there for 2 hours, not knowing what was going on. How's that not going to stay with you? How are you not going to bring that home? So I think it's very similar, I suppose, is what I would say in a lot of ways. It's not the same, but it's perfectly possible to have very similar feelings. And this idea that you're not allowed to speak up because you're the one that's supposed to be holding things together, and because you didn't have it as bad type thing. It's natural to feel it.
And that you have to take responsibility for supporting the person who's been through the loss and who is now having maybe difficulties around parenting.
Yeah.
And being the main parent at that point. And that can be really hard.
Totally.
Especially, as you say, if you're supposed to be continuing to be kind of upbeat and chirpy and cheerful and helping everybody through, it's hard.
Yeah. When we add in an extra dimension of step parent, or being faced with, if I've lost a pregnancy and I am a step parent, or I'm involved in the raising of children that aren't biologically mine, if you like, the complicated feelings that would bring up as well. And I suppose if you had a shorthand for all of these things, it would be there is no wrong way to feel. If it makes you feel jealous sometimes, if it makes you feel annoyed or frustrated or kind of angry with the world that this has kind of happened, like quite a common thing to happen, isn't it, is to see when other people seem to be having a baby very easily. That can make you feel very frustrated. So I can imagine in the position of being a step parent, trying to do your best for those children while also feeling all the loss for the child that you were carrying. That's just really complicated. And why wouldn't that be difficult for you? And all of those emotions are valid. I think one of the things that people struggle with is feeling like a bad person for feeling stuff. And that's just never fair. I suppose we can't help the way that we feel. We can try and help the way that we respond. But I suppose the thing I would say is, or finish with, is there's no wrong way to feel. And if you can try and allow that for yourself, that can be helpful. A nice way of doing that, if you struggle to express it to other people because you're worried what they will think, sometimes what I'll ask people to do is write it down instead. So when you try not to feel the way you feel, it doesn't work. You're just fighting against yourself, and it doesn't work. If you let yourself feel it, and one way to do that is to write it down. I feel this, and just put it all down, as messy as it is. Sometimes you can at least feel like you've spent a bit of time letting yourself feel that way, and that can kind of free you up to go and engage with life for a bit. And then when it builds up again, go and write it down. And that can be a nice middle ground. If you don't feel anybody will really understand, that can be a nice middle ground.
Yeah, because talking about things, you know, we're always telling people to talk about things and to share their feelings and to find someone whom they trust, and you know, that really can make a difference. But sometimes you can't, and sometimes those people aren't the right, you know, they're not the right person to talk to, because they find it tricky and they don't understand what you're saying and what you're feeling. I think you're right. It's about allowing yourself the time, and maybe sometimes you have to kind of artificially carve out time to allow the feelings, to write them down, to write a poem, to write your story and your feelings. I mean, the stories that we get sent to us, that we put on our website, other people find so comforting, because then they know they're not alone in those feelings that they think they shouldn't have. I feel angry, I feel jealous, I feel, you know, disappointed, whatever those feelings are. That's just being a normal human being.
Yeah. Thank you, Ruth. Do you reckon that's probably our time for today?
I think it probably is our time for today. Actually, that's extraordinary timekeeping, because one of my anxieties was that we would get the timing all wrong and we would run out of time. But,
yeah, I know there were more topics that we would have
to,
ideally liked to get through, but I'm hoping we got through, yeah, a decent chunk.
It'll be, I mean, we're going to share this somehow or other online. I need my techie help to do this. And it will be really good to hear back from people about their thoughts on the subject. Yeah. So because all of this kind of conversation just helps to highlight things that are difficult for us to talk about, and that's always good. So
yeah. Thank you, Ruth. Appreciate you having me.